North Atlantic, March 17, 1943, 03, 40 hours. The U-boat breaks the surface like something expelled from the deep, a dark, dripping shape against a sky that offers no stars, no moon, only a low ceiling of cloud pressing down on water the color of cold iron. The commander climbs the conning tower ladder. Wind hits him immediately. He steadies himself, scans the horizon with practiced eyes. Nothing. 40 feet of black ocean in every direction and not a single silhouette. He nods to his radio operator. The transmission begins. 18 seconds of encrypted Morse tapped out at speed, directed to BDU Boat Command 700 miles to the southeast. A position report. A convoy bearing. Routine traffic. The commander has transmitted dozens of times in conditions far more dangerous than this. 18 seconds is nothing. A held breath. He has been told, and he believes, that Enigma encryption renders the content of his message impenetrable. He is correct about that. He is correct about almost everything except the one thing that will kill him. He does not know that 51 miles to the northwest, a needle on a British escort vessel has already moved. By the spring of 1943, something had gone deeply, inexplicably wrong inside the German submarine fleet. The mathematics of the preceding 2 years had seemed almost divine in their favor. In 1942 alone, U-boats had sent over 6 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. A figure so catastrophic that Churchill would later write, he feared the Atlantic War more than any other theater of the conflict. Dranitz had built his doctrine around the Wolfpack, groups of 8, 10, sometimes 15 submarines coordinating across hundreds of miles of ocean, converging on convoys from multiple angles simultaneously. The system was lethal. The system required communication, position reports, contact signals, attack orders, weather data, a continuous flow of radio traffic between submarines and command. It worked. And then, with a speed that disturbed even experienced analysts, it stopped working. 1943 arrived and the losses began reversing, not gradually, not incrementally. U-boats were being found and killed with a precision that the German naval staff could not account for through any conventional explanation. Commanders who had survived years of combat were dying on routine patrols. Submarines were being intercepted mid-transit, far from any convoy route, in positions they had transmitted to no one except BDU. Drunitz's staff ran through every possibility with methodical anxiety. Enigma compromise. Investigated, rejected on technical grounds. Informants screened for, none found credible. Allied reconnaissance. The patrol gaps over the mid-Atlantic were still too wide for consistent aerial coverage. The answers kept dissolving. What no German intelligence officer seriously considered, not with the necessary weight, not with the necessary urgency, was that the British were finding U-boats not by understanding what they said, but simply by hearing that they had spoken. The technology had a name that sounded almost comic against the gravity of its consequences. High-frequency direction finding. The men who operated it called it Huff-Duff, and the informality of that nickname perhaps obscured how fundamentally it would alter the submarine war. The principle was old. Direction finding had existed since the First World War. But what the British had built by 1942 was something qualitatively different. A networked, automated, fleet-integrated system that could fix a transmitting radio source within seconds of its first signal. It did not need cryptanalysts. It did not need code books. It needed nothing except the radio wave itself, the physical fact of the transmission, and from that alone, it could calculate a bearing. 2 stations receiving the same transmission could triangulate a position. 3 stations could produce a fix of extraordinary accuracy. The engineering breakthrough came from work done within Britain's broader signals apparatus, Watson-Watt's contributions to radio technology providing the scientific foundation. But the operational refinement was the work of the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center and the Western Approaches Command, working in a collaboration that was, for that era, remarkably fluid and responsive. Shore stations were established across Iceland, Newfoundland, Gibraltar, and the British Isles, forming a vast geometric web across the Atlantic. Each station reported bearings to a central plotting room. But the crucial development, the one that closed the final gap, was the miniaturization of Huff-Duff receivers to the point where they could be mounted on escort vessels. By mid-1942, convoy escorts were carrying the equipment. By 1943, it was standard fit. Consider what this meant operationally. A U-boat surfacing at night to transmit a position report, a routine, doctrine-mandated act, was simultaneously illuminating itself on the plotting tables of the shore network and the nearest convoy escort. The escort's Huff-Duff operator would read his bearing needle, call it to the bridge, and within minutes a destroyer or corvette would be accelerating toward that bearing at flank speed. Often the U-boat was still transmitting when the warship began its approach. Sometimes the aircraft, already airborne on patrol, received the redirected vector before the submarine had even retracted its antenna. Speed was everything. Not the speed of the ships, the speed of the intelligence cycle. Fixed to decision to action in under 4 minutes. That was the target. That was often achieved. There is a particular cruelty in the way Huff-Duff turned Drunitz's own strategic logic against him, and it is worth pausing on it. Drunitz understood, with a clarity that most naval theorists of his era lacked, that submarines alone could not defeat convoys. A single U-boat attacking a defended convoy was likely to achieve 1 or 2 torpedo hits before being driven down and hunted for hours. But a coordinated group striking from multiple bearings simultaneously could overwhelm the escorts and tear the convoy apart. The Wolfpack was the solution to that tactical problem, and it was genuinely brilliant. But coordination required communication. There was no other way. Submarines submerged could not see one another, could not signal by light, could not coordinate through any medium except radio. So they transmitted positions, contacts, bearings, orders. Constantly. The more effectively they coordinated, the more they transmitted. The more they transmitted, the more precisely the British could locate each individual boat. The Wolfpack's collective strength was built on each submarine's individual exposure. Every unit that made the system work was simultaneously providing the thread by which it could be unraveled. Drunitz had built an instrument of such intricate operational elegance that its own mechanism was the source of its destruction. He never entirely grasped this during the war. Not fully. Not in time. What German engineers and intelligence officers focused on instead was radar. This was not irrational. Centimetric airborne radar, developed by the British and deployed on maritime patrol aircraft by 1942, was genuinely devastating to surfaced U-boats. It operated on wavelengths so short that it could detect a submarine's conning tower at night, in poor visibility, from miles away, and guide an attacking aircraft to within bombing range before the crew on deck had any warning. When U-boat losses to air attack began climbing, German engineers worked to understand the threat and answer it. They produced the Metox receiver, tuned to detect the longer wavelengths of earlier Allied radar. U-boat crews were told it would warn them of approaching aircraft in time to dive. There was some truth in this. Then the British shifted to centimetric radar, which Metox couldn't detect, and the attacks intensified again. Germany then developed Naxos, Fliege, and successive generations of radar detectors, investing enormous engineering intelligence in solving a problem that was real but partial. Meanwhile, Huff-Duff continued operating on frequencies none of these detectors touched, in a domain of the electromagnetic spectrum that German counterintelligence never identified as the primary threat. Not because German scientists were incapable, they were not. Not because the technology was beyond comprehension, it was not exotic. Britain's own earlier direction-finding work was known. Germany used direction finding. The gap was not scientific. It was architectural. The British had built a networked, integrated, institutionally prioritized system and had deployed it quietly, systematically across an entire ocean. Germany had not built the equivalent and, critically, had not identified the absence as a vulnerability. There is something almost philosophical in that failure. The instrument that killed 300 submarines was not invisible because it was hidden well. It was invisible because Germany was looking somewhere else with tremendous discipline and focus. A misdirected intelligence apparatus is often more dangerous to itself than any enemy action. Germany's engineers were solving the wrong equation, brilliantly, tirelessly, fatally, while the real mechanism continued its quiet work. May 1943. In a single month, the German U-boat fleet lost 41 submarines, 41 crews. Men who had spent years learning to survive an ocean that wanted them dead. Durnitz sat with his intelligence reports, and the mathematics were simply beyond recovery. The fleet was averaging one U-boat lost for every Allied ship sunk. 6 months earlier, the ratio had been reversed. He issued the order that no admiral commanding a successful offensive campaign should ever have to issue withdrawal. The Wolfpacks left the North Atlantic. They would return, in smaller numbers, with new equipment, with acoustic torpedoes and snorkel devices. But the strategic dominance was gone and it never came back. The Battle of the Atlantic, the longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War, had turned on a convergence of factors. Ultra-decrypts provided the strategic picture, centimetric radar denied the surface, long-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic gap, but running beneath all of it, constant and undetected, was Huff-Duff, the system that positioned the aircraft, the system that vectored the escort, the system that transformed raw signal intelligence into a killing geometry. It never stopped working because it was never found. After the war, German naval analysts were given access to Allied operational records. The reconstruction of what had actually killed the submarine fleet took time and produced a specific, quiet shock, not outrage, not disbelief, but the particular deflation of a man who realizes the trap was elegant rather than overwhelming. The technology itself, when stripped to its principles, was not mysterious. What had made it lethal was the discipline behind it. The British had deployed it widely and spoken of it narrowly. They had trained operators to use it and trained everyone around those operators to say nothing. No captured crewman provided a complete enough description. No intercept of Allied communications revealed its scope. The secret held not because it was protected by extraordinary security measures, but because the people who understood it understood exactly what was at stake if they didn't. That restraint, institutional, habitual, almost cultural, proved as decisive as the engineering itself. North Atlantic, March 17, 1943, 03:40 hours. The transmission ends, 18 seconds. The commander retracts the antenna, satisfied. He scans the horizon one final time. The water is empty. He descends. The hatch seals. The U-boat slides beneath the surface, and the sea closes over it without a sound. 51 miles to the northwest, a plotting officer draws a line on a chart. Then a second line from a shore station bearing transmitted 30 seconds ago. The lines intersect. A circle is drawn in red crayon. He picks up the voice pipe. The commander did nothing wrong by his own doctrine. He was trained correctly. He was disciplined and experienced and careful. He transmitted for 18 seconds when 18 seconds was all that was required. He had no reason to believe the act of speaking to his own command was the act of signing his own name to a death warrant. That is the particular nature of the trap. It required no treachery, no failure, no weakness on his part. It only required that he do his job, and that somewhere above the gray horizon, a needle was already moving. The sea remembers nothing. The silence remembers everything.